Fire by Insect Brain, Part 2. It was the losers who rose up against the Duke. All the histories agree on this. The punk rockers never had any stomach for a fight. Perhaps they always knew they were transitory and terminal, like the coma before death. What did it matter who barked the orders in the sepulchral chambers of intensive care? Their own music had taught them that power is always in other hands. The only order they saw in the universe took the form of conspiracy, intricate, merciless machines that made money behind closed doors in office buildings where punks couldn't even get past the security guard. The Duke's orders were at least clear and easy to follow. He wanted obedient customers. He set the price. Humiliation was always part of it. Every punk had to answer to the name faggot. One that didn't got a broken bottle twisted in his face, and a hammer popped almost delicately into his larynx. It took him 35 hours to die, blind and screaming silently through a crushed throat. The memory of that event clung to the Duke's hammer and radiated outward into the air of South Street. There were those who felt this as a simple reminder to do as they were told. They did not chafe. The Duke's hammer also governed the little plastic packets that prevented the reminder from becoming too vivid. There were others, though, who could not shake the image of the jerking body and its hamburgered features. They dreamed about jagged spires of glass invading their eyes. They could see themselves held and shrieking like animals, and they could feel themselves held and bursting in shocked, insane agony as their eyes exploded in a final blaze of blood. That crack of the bottle against the metal edge of the bar split them. Into themselves and some other who was watching. At first, the one who was watching was just a pair of eyes, refusing to blink. Then the eyes began looking about, searching, but still refusing to blink. This is only one version of the beginning. There are many, but this is the one I seem to return to often. The Duke's bikers had Harleys, but the punks of Punk City favored highly modified dirt bikes. To me, these were as amazing as the computers, and, initially at least, infinitely more desirable. Torque bikes were stripped clean of all superfluities, but smoothly bodied in featherweight plastic, yet still light enough to lift with a strong arm. They were beautifully, breathtakingly silent. The engines and exhaust pipes were wrapped in porous, muffling armor, and behind the batteries sat a small red synthesizer box which ate the sound of firing pistons and somehow digested it, cancelled it with anti-sonic computer chords. We learned how to ride late at night on Delaware Avenue, where the river was close enough to smell a deep, faint stench that gas fumes couldn't quite cover. The bikes and gear allotted to the new ones were discards, of course, but we didn't mind. We felt as if we were being assembled into punks out of spare parts and would one day be transformed into the likeness of the ones we most admired. I tried to copy Johnny Dodge, who stood his wheelies straight up, his legs straight and parallel to the chassis, his head thrust forward like a ski flyer. They taught us to buckle the plexiglass shield to our left-hand fingers, but Johnny Dodge simply held his. And so I persisted in holding mine too, until I dropped it in a practice pass and got my head cracked with a padded scriber. When you run so silently, you can hear the blow that gets you, hear yourself fall and scrape against the asphalt. It robs you of that ghostly power which seems to be yours as you ride with the punks who drove the Harleys from South Street. This is what I think of when I hear them ask how the punks could have been there without anyone's knowing about them. This is how. We were the phantom force among the city's gangs. We lived and worked at night. We ran silently on bikes without lights, and when we descended on a Harley gang, they had no chance, and rarely any memory of how they'd been hit. But this is only part of who we are. During the daylight hours, South Street subsided into anonymity. There were day guards, of course, but you would never have seen them unless you tried to attack the sleeping punks and their sleeping dogs. I have always enjoyed imagining a solitary woman shopping on South Street in early afternoon. She picks her way down the sidewalk, high heels clipping through the shadows of the trees. If she only knew what lay within 10 yards of her, the packed departments in which the punks bedded down after the night's work, the enormous silicon spider hibernating above its coaxial web in the Cream King building, the king of Punk City drowsing uneasily in the metal court beyond Head House Arcade. But she does not know. And if we asked her today, she would swear that there was no punk writer kingdom on South Street, then or ever. The Sandman was one of the few who would talk to new ones. He ran the bug shop on 3rd Street, and he also designed and made by hand the custom input devices ordered by the rest of the bands. The routine work was performed mostly by new ones who learned bit by bit about the gear that might one day give them an identity. Mordecai and I drew the assignment to work for the Sandman shortly after our whipping. Steerhead returned to the bitter box where he worked very quietly on disentangling cables. Things were quiet at the bug shop too, but it seemed like a good kind of quiet, with plenty to do and not much need to talk. The Sandman was a fat, jovial man with 3 strands of hair pasted over his bald, dome-like head. He wore a shiny leather apron with about 20 narrow pockets, each of which sprouted 3 or 4 gleaming little tools. He looked like a butcher of fine machinery. Computers, he told Mordecai and me, are sensitive. They don't like the things people say about them, so be polite. Then he actually lowered his voice so the computers wouldn't hear his next words. People love to say that computers are stupid, that they don't really think, that they're just incredibly fast idiots who follow instructions. I don't want to hear either of you saying those things. His small, darty eyes looked troubled, as if he suspected us of having said such things about computers. We hadn't. We didn't know anything at all about computers, including what people said about them. They'd never come up in conversation before. Computers do think, he said, correcting our imagined heresy. They think the thoughts people give them, and if that makes them seem stupid, what does it say about the people who tell them what to think? He paused, convinced of having demolished our resistance, but determined to receive the expected concessionary reply. After a spell of intense mental effort, Mordecai said, "I don't know." The Sandman sighed. It says that most people who think they know something about computers are stupid. "Oh," said Mordecai, brightening. "Insect and I don't know anything about computers. Does that mean we're smart?" "Just be polite," replied the Sandman, evidently through with explaining computers for a while. He put us to work in the chip factory down in the basement. That's where I met Jody Legg. She was a pretty, garrulous girl who, despite her name, seemed unaware that her legs were heart-stoppingly lovely. She professed not to know why the Sandman had given her such a short work apron, but Mordecai and I understood his wisdom in this, at least. She had small white hands that were deft with circuit boards and soldering irons, even though her mind was always elsewhere. Her dream was to be in a band and spend a lot of time in the vicinity of St. Muke. "I know he's not handsome," she said, "but looks aren't everything to a girl, you know." Mordecai and I glanced quickly at each other, suddenly hopeful, but Jody proceeded to get depressingly specific about what it took to attract her to a man.